In a world where stories of loss and fortune intertwine, few have captured hearts quite like the tale of a young seamstress whose compassion changed the course of so many lives. It all began in a small corner of the city where the sound of sewing machines hummed softly through narrow streets, and the scent of freshly pressed fabric filled the air. The story of Clara Mendez was not one born of luxury or privilege but of resilience, humility, and the quiet strength of a woman who believed that kindness, though fragile, could heal the deepest wounds. Clara was just 24 when her name became known, though not for fame or riches, but for an act of extraordinary humanity that no one could have predicted would alter her destiny forever. She worked long hours in a modest tailoring shop tucked between an old bakery and a hardware store. Her days were filled with needle and thread, her nights with dreams of stability she never quite reached. Life had taught her to survive on little, but it hadn't dimmed her spirit. She was known around the neighborhood for her warm smile and careful work. Customers would often say that Clara didn't just mend clothes, she mended stories, stitching hope into fabric and life into worn-out garments. Yet behind that smile was a young woman carrying her own burdens quietly. Her parents had passed when she was barely out of her teens, leaving her to fend for herself. She had no siblings, no savings, and no one to rely on except her own determination. One cold and rainy evening, as the streets emptied under the weight of a storm, Clara was closing up her small shop. The wind howled through the alleyways, and the city lights flickered uncertainly through the downpour. She locked the door, pulled her coat tight, and began the familiar walk home. But then she heard it, a faint sound, so soft that at first she thought it was just the wind. When it came again, a thin, desperate cry, she froze. The sound was coming from behind a stack of old crates near the side of the workshop. She hesitated, fear rising in her chest, but compassion urged her forward. And then she saw them, two tiny infants wrapped in a damp, torn blanket, their faces pale, their cries barely more than a whisper against the rain. They couldn't have been more than a few days old. Clara's heart pounded. She knelt, hands trembling, and carefully lifted them into her arms. They were freezing, so small that they barely filled her coat as she wrapped it around them. The realization struck her like lightning, someone had abandoned them. She looked around, calling out into the darkness, but no one answered. There was no note, no sign of a parent, just the echo of rain on pavement. She hurried through the storm toward the nearest hospital, her clothes soaked, her breath short. The doctors took the babies immediately, and Clara waited, drenched and anxious, as they checked the infants for signs of illness or harm. The nurse returned with a gentle smile, saying the babies would be fine. They were malnourished, but alive. In the days that followed, Clara couldn't forget their faces. She visited the hospital every day after work, bringing small blankets and baby clothes she sewed herself. The nurses grew fond of her, calling her the angel seamstress. Authorities tried to trace the children's family, but no one came forward. The investigation turned cold, and the infants, two twin boys, remained in state custody, waiting for someone to care. That someone turned out to be Clara. Despite her modest income and tiny apartment, she couldn't bear the thought of them growing up without love. Her friends called her brave, others called her foolish. But she didn't care. She signed the adoption papers with shaking hands, tears streaming down her face, as she named them Leo and Liam, two names that, to her, sounded like light and strength. Her home changed overnight. The silence she once lived in was replaced with giggles, cries, and tiny footsteps. She sold extra dresses, took late-night orders, and even borrowed an old crib from a neighbor. Every corner of her home became a symbol of sacrifice and love. Clara would often stay awake into the early hours, sewing by the faint glow of a lamp while the twins slept nearby. When she grew tired, she'd look over at them and remind herself why she kept going. Each stitch she made, each customer she served, was for them. And though her hands grew calloused, her heart felt full. Years passed, and the three of them became inseparable. The boys grew up knowing little of luxury but plenty of love. Clara taught them kindness, honesty, and the value of hard work. On weekends, they would accompany her to the market, where she'd sell handmade clothes and repair garments for the townspeople. Everyone in the neighborhood adored them, the humble seamstress and her twins who always wore matching clothes stitched with her care. They were her pride, her joy, her entire world. She had given them everything she had, and in return, they gave her a sense of purpose she'd never known, yet even as life settled into a peaceful rhythm, the mystery of their origins lingered like a quiet whisper. Sometimes, Clara would look into their faces and wonder about the family that had left them. Who were they? Why had they abandoned two innocent babies? But she never let those thoughts linger for long. In her heart, she believed that family wasn't defined by blood, it was built by love and sacrifice. And in that sense, she was their true mother. What Clara didn't know was that her decision that rainy night had unknowingly tied her life to a man she had never met, a man who had once lost everything. Far away, across cities and years, that man lived under a different sky. He was a father who had spent a decade searching for his children, carrying the guilt of losing them in an accident that shattered his world. At the time of their disappearance, he had been too broken to continue the search himself, relying on investigators and chance. When no leads appeared, he rebuilt his life from the ground up, becoming one of the most successful CEOs in the country. Yet despite the power, the wealth, and the endless praise, he felt incomplete. No amount of success could fill the void left by the loss of his wife and children, and one ordinary afternoon, destiny began to move again. The threads of two lives, one built in luxury, the other in sacrifice, were slowly being woven together by fate. Clara continued her quiet work, unaware that her kindness would soon open the door to a truth that would shake her world. The same boys she had rescued from the shadows of an alley were about to be recognized by the man who had spent half his life searching for them. And the young seamstress who had once saved two abandoned children was about to discover that the love she gave freely would return to her in a way she could never have imagined. Years passed like the soft unfolding of a fabric, each thread weaving a new chapter into the life Clara had built for herself and her two boys. Leo and Liam were growing fast, their curious minds mirroring each other's energy and wonder. The small tailoring shop that once barely survived had now become a modest but steady business. Clara had managed to gain loyal clients who trusted her craftsmanship. She worked tirelessly, never taking a day for granted, her focus always on providing a better life for the sons she had chosen with her heart. They were her motivation, her reason to rise before sunrise and so long after the city went quiet. Life wasn't easy, but it was beautiful in its simplicity. It was on one of those ordinary afternoons that destiny decided to reappear, cloaked in something extraordinary. A sleek black car, polished like glass, pulled up in front of Clara's humble shop. It was an unfamiliar sight in that neighborhood, where bicycles and old scooters were far more common. The door opened, and a tall man stepped out, his posture confident, his expression reserved but tired in a way only time and heartbreak could explain. His name was Adrian Cole, though Clara didn't know that yet. To her, he was just another customer. Adrian had come to the small town as part of a business expansion project for his company, Cole Enterprises, a multi-billion-dollar firm that had recently started new ventures in textile production. He had lived his life at the top of the corporate world, powerful, respected, admired, but within that success was an ache he had learned to hide well. Behind every polished smile in the business press, behind every celebrated deal, was a wound that refused to close. 10 years earlier, a tragic car accident had taken his wife and separated him from his twin infant sons. For months, he had searched every hospital, every orphanage, every foster registry, but all leads had gone cold. It was as if his children had disappeared into thin air. The only thing he had left was their memory, and the guilt that he hadn't been there to protect them. As he entered Clara's shop, the faint scent of lavender and freshly ironed fabric filled the air. She looked up from her sewing machine, brushed her hands on her apron, and greeted him with a polite smile. Her warmth immediately softened the cold edge of his corporate demeanor. He explained that he needed uniforms for an upcoming charity event and had been told she was the best seamstress in the district. Clara, flattered but unaware of his identity, promised she would deliver quality work. The two spoke briefly, their conversation simple and professional, until something caught Adrian's attention. A framed photograph resting near the counter. It showed two young boys smiling in matching shirts, arms around each other, their faces bright with innocence. Adrian's heart stopped. He stepped closer, his breath trembling as he took in their features, the same sharp jawline, the same brown eyes, the same dimpled smiles he had once kissed goodnight. He felt dizzy, memories flooding back like a dam breaking. The world around him blurred. It couldn't be, and yet every instinct told him it was. The twins in the photograph looked exactly like his lost sons would at that age. He forced himself to remain calm, concealing the storm of emotions raging inside. He asked casually about the boys, and Clara spoke proudly, telling him how she had adopted them as infants after finding them abandoned years ago. Her words confirmed what his heart already knew. He wanted to ask 1,000 questions but stopped himself. Something about the way she spoke, the love and gratitude in her voice, made him realize she wasn't someone who had taken advantage of the situation. She was someone who had saved them. Over the following weeks, Adrian found reasons to return. He commissioned more orders, donated fabric, and asked for repairs on items that didn't really need fixing. Each visit allowed him to watch the family from a distance, to piece together what had happened during those lost years. He saw how the boys adored Clara, how they rushed to help her close the shop, how they called her "Mom" with unfiltered affection. The sight tore at him and soothed him all at once. For the first time in a decade, he saw his children laugh again. Yet the knowledge that they no longer remembered him, that another person had filled the space he once occupied, cut deeply. Adrian struggled with the decision of what to do next. Part of him wanted to reveal the truth immediately, to reclaim his sons and bring them into the world he had rebuilt for them. But another part of him, the wiser part, saw how happy they were. Clara had given them what he had lost long ago, a home, stability, and love that couldn't be measured in wealth. She had given them a childhood free of the cold loneliness that money often brought. So he stayed quiet, visiting her shop often under the pretext of business while silently rebuilding a connection to the family that was unknowingly his. Word spread quickly through the small town. The wealthy businessman's repeated visits stirred curiosity and gossip. Some whispered that he was courting the seamstress, others believed he wanted to invest in her business. Clara dismissed the rumors, though she couldn't deny that his presence made her uneasy. He was kind and respectful but carried an air of mystery, as if he was always on the verge of saying something important but never did. One evening, as the sun set and the shop emptied, Adrian finally gathered the courage to speak the truth. He told Clara everything: the accident, the loss, the years of searching, the heartbreak of not knowing. Clara listened in stunned silence, her mind racing as his words slowly connected to the faces of the twins sleeping peacefully at home. She realized, with a shock that made her tremble, that the babies she had rescued were not abandoned by choice but lost through tragedy. Her heart broke for him. She had imagined their birth parents as careless or desperate, never as victims of fate. When Adrian showed her old photos of his wife and children, the truth was undeniable. They were the same babies she had found crying in the rain all those years ago. Tears filled her eyes, not from fear of losing them, but from the enormity of what had just been revealed. The man before her wasn't a stranger anymore. He was their father, their real father. Adrian expected anger or resistance, but instead he found compassion. Clara thanked him for telling her the truth and told him softly that while biology made him their father, love had made them her sons. There was no bitterness in her tone, only understanding. Adrian's voice cracked as he told her he didn't want to take them away. He had lost them once and couldn't bear to tear them from the woman who had given them everything he couldn't. All he wanted was a place in their lives, to know them, to love them, to watch them grow. The emotional exchange between them became the beginning of something deeper, a bridge between two worlds built not on conflict but on gratitude and respect. Adrian admired Clara not only for her strength but for the purity of her heart. She had done what most wouldn't dare to do, raising 2 children on her own without expecting anything in return. He offered to help her expand her business, to give her the resources she had long been denied, but she hesitated. Pride held her back, yet he assured her that his offer wasn't charity, it was repayment for a debt that could never truly be repaid. By the time the boys learned the truth, the story had already begun to spread beyond their small town. What had started as a random act of compassion had become a miracle of fate. The seamstress who had once worked by candlelight now stood at the crossroads of 2 families, both built by love in different forms. And as Adrian quietly promised to stand by her side, not as a benefactor but as a friend and father, the threads of their lives began to intertwine into a new pattern, one neither of them could have ever imagined.